Long before humans, long before cities or the invention of language, long before mammals became the dominant force on the planet, Earth was ruled by reptiles of all shapes and sizes. The Age of Dinosaurs, known in scientific terms as the Mesozoic era, spanned an astonishing 186 million years. That's not a small window of time. That's nearly 75 times longer than the entire span of recorded human history. The Mesozoic is divided into 3 periods: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. Each of these epochs saw dramatic changes in climate, continental arrangement, and life itself. If you, as a modern human, were somehow transported back in time to this era, even with supplies and knowledge, you would face near certain death within hours. But why tonight? We'll begin to gently unravel the layers of that answer. Let's begin in the late Triassic period. Over 230 million years ago, the world was warmer than it is today. In fact, there were no polar ice caps, and the average temperature of the Earth's surface was significantly higher. The continents we know today were fused together in one massive supercontinent known as Pangaea. There were no familiar coastlines, no oceans with names like Atlantic or Indian, just an immense, dry interior, prone to desertification and intense temperature shifts between day and night. The oxygen levels in the atmosphere were much lower than what you're breathing now. That alone would be enough to cause discomfort, confusion, and eventually unconsciousness. Human lungs evolved to function in a very specific range of oxygen saturation. The lower levels of oxygen in the Triassic atmosphere would have left you feeling constantly short of breath, especially while trying to flee from a predator, or even just walking across the uneven volcanic ground. Volcanoes, by the way, were a common feature of the landscape. The Earth's crust was still reshaping itself from earlier supercontinent cycles. Lava flows and tectonic instability were part of daily life. Entire regions could be wiped out in hours by flows of lava or choking volcanic gases. Imagine trying to find shelter from a summer thunderstorm, only to realize the storm is spewing molten rock and poisonous ash. And you can't drink the rain, it's acidic. You'd need specialized breathing equipment and shelter just to avoid death by environmental exposure alone. But let's assume, for a moment, you've survived the atmosphere and the terrain. You've brought food, water, and some kind of protective clothing. You still have to contend with the animal life. In the late Triassic, the first true dinosaurs were just emerging. They were not yet the giants of the later Jurassic, but they were fast, agile, and often carnivorous. Creatures like Colaphysis, a slender, bipedal predator about the size of a large dog, hunted in packs and likely had sharp senses. You, a lone primate with no natural defenses, would be seen as easy prey. You could try to run, but on rough volcanic terrain and without adapted limbs for sprinting across prehistoric sediment, you'd be caught in minutes. Even the herbivores weren't safe to be around. Early sauropodomorphs, the ancestors of long-necked dinosaurs like Brachiosaurus, were powerful and wary. Approaching them without triggering a stampede or getting trampled would require more knowledge and skill than any modern zoologist could offer. And unlike in a zoo, these creatures wouldn't have fencing or schedules. Their behavior would be dictated entirely by instinct and environment. There'd be no way to predict where they were headed or how they'd react to your presence. Let's pause for a moment and consider something simple. Water. You're thirsty. It's hot. You've made it away from the predators, and now you want a drink. But you don't recognize the vegetation. You don't know which streams are safe. The water is likely teeming with ancient bacteria and parasites, to which your immune system has zero resistance. A sip from the wrong pool could cause severe diarrhea, dehydration, or worse. There are no hospitals here, no antibiotics, no medicine. The plants aren't safe either. Many ancient ferns, cycads, and conifers were covered in chemical defenses designed to repel or poison herbivores. Your modern digestive system has no experience processing their toxic compounds. Even trying to survive as a forager would be dangerous. And then, there's the soundscape. Nights in the Mesozoic were not silent. They were filled with the sounds of insects, amphibians, and reptiles. Strange calls, rustling foliage, and distant, echoing footsteps of creatures you can't see. You'd likely find it impossible to sleep. your brain on constant alert for threats it doesn't understand. Without modern shelter or protection, you'd be cold, vulnerable, and completely at the mercy of an alien biosphere. The Earth's magnetic field was different, the radiation levels slightly higher. The stars in the sky would be familiar, but misaligned. As continental drifts and orbital shifts would have changed the position of the land masses. The moon would still be there, but closer than it is today, its gravitational pull slightly stronger, affecting tides and possibly tectonic stress. You wouldn't know where you were. Your phone wouldn't work. Your GPS would be meaningless. And there are no maps to guide you. Just endless, primitive wilderness. Even if you had weapons, say, a modern rifle or a drone, you'd soon run out of ammunition or battery power. Nothing modern is designed to function in this environment for long. Your clothes would wear down. Your skin would burn under unfamiliar ultraviolet radiation levels, and any food you brought would spoil quickly in the intense heat. You would be, quite simply, unequipped. And while it may be tempting to imagine yourself as a time-traveling survivor, the truth is far more sobering. The Mesozoic era was not a theme park. It was a raw, primal, and merciless world, and yet life thrived. Not human life, but dinosaurs, reptiles, insects, early mammals, and plants found ways to adapt. For millions of years, ecosystems evolved in isolation, responding to environmental pressures and biological competition. It was not a peaceful time, but it was a successful one, at least for those who were built for it. Evolution doesn't reward intelligence alone. It rewards adaptation. And in this world, humans simply don't belong. As we end this first chapter, take a moment to rest your mind. Let these images of ancient Earth drift quietly through your thoughts. No need to hold on to the details, just imagine the warm air, the towering trees, the strange cries in the night. You're safe here, in your bed, far from the dangers of the mess. Let the ancient world slowly dissolve into dreams. If you're still awake, remember there's much more to come. We've only just begun. In the next part, we'll step deeper into the Jurassic period, where the dinosaurs truly began to dominate the Earth. You'll meet massive herbivores, cunning predators, and the rising complexity of prehistoric ecosystems. Until then, breathe deeply, you've traveled far. We return now to a world that has grown wilder, greener, and more alive with the passage of time. The Triassic has ended, and the Jurassic period has begun. It is now approximately 201 million years ago. The Earth is still a dangerous place for a modern human, but it is now more complex, more diverse, and in many ways, even more unforgiving. This is the era when dinosaurs take the global stage not just as survivors, but as rulers. Their size, their speed, and their variety increased dramatically. If the Triassic was a prelude, the Jurassic is the beginning of the symphony. The Earth is full of music, but none of it is safe. Continental drift has begun to reshape the planet's surface. Pangaea, the once unified supercontinent, is starting to crack and divide. Shallow seas begin to form between the rifting land masses. Humid climates become more widespread. Rain falls more frequently in some regions, supporting the rise of lush forests dominated by conifers, tree ferns, and ginkgos. There are no flowers, yet those wouldn't appear until the Cretaceous, but the world is beginning to feel rich and vibrant. Towering tree trunks fill the landscape, forming canopies that block the sunlight and create a multi-layered ecosystem below. The air is thick with moisture. It smells like resin, damp soil, and strange pollen. In these forests, massive sauropods begin to dominate the plant-eating niche. Creatures like Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and the mighty Brachiosaurus walk slowly through the undergrowth. Brachiosaurus, for example, was more than 80 feet long and may have weighed over 60 tons. Its neck alone could stretch over 30 feet into the air, allowing it to browse from the tops of trees. And despite its size, this animal was a gentle giant, feeding on leaves and twigs. But don't mistake gentleness for safety. Being near one of these colossal creatures would be like standing under a moving building. One accidental step from its feet could crush you instantly. These animals are not malicious, they simply don't see you. You are smaller than their prey, smaller than a threat, and smaller than their sense of awareness. Still, herbivores weren't alone. The Jurassic also saw the rise of some of the most iconic predators to ever live. Allosaurus was the apex predator of many Jurassic ecosystems, a powerful bipedal carnivore with strong jaws and serrated teeth. It was the terror of the plains. Allosaurus wasn't as large as the later Tyrannosaurus, but it was fast, smart, and very efficient. It likely hunted in coordinated groups and could bring down prey much larger than itself. You, on the other hand, are a slow-moving, soft-skinned anomaly. You have no fur to insulate you, no claws to defend yourself, and no understanding of how to navigate this layered ecosystem. If Allosaurus caught your scent hand, you wouldn't have the luxury of being upwind forever. It could stalk you silently through the trees, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then there are the smaller predators. They don't have names that echo in popular culture, but they were fast and agile, adapted to chasing lizards, mammals, and insects through the forest floor. They wouldn't necessarily hunt you, but if you threatened them, or if you surprised them, they might attack defensively. Worse still, their bites or scratches could introduce infections. Remember, antibiotics don't exist. And even a minor wound could become fatal in this environment, where every cut is exposed to moisture, mud, and unknown bacteria. Nighttime in the Jurassic is not a safe reprieve. As darkness falls, the temperature drops, but the forest never truly quiets. Giant insects flit through the underbrush. Amphibians croak in long, eerie rhythms. The occasional distant roar, unplaceable and deep, rolls through the mist. You have no fire. Fire needs dry wood and a method of ignition, and even if you brought matches, the humidity here would make them nearly useless. You can't build a shelter. The ground is thick with roots and crawling life. Sleeping on it directly means becoming part of the food chain feasted upon by ancient fleas, mites, or worse. Sleeping above it means climbing a tree you don't recognize, whose bark may be toxic or unstable. If you do manage to fall asleep, it won't be restful. You'll wake up covered in bites, dehydrated and sore. And then there are the storms. Jurassic weather systems were immense. With higher sea levels and more active volcanoes, the planet's climate system was turbulent. Thunderstorms could erupt with minimal warning, drenching the forest floor and turning pathways into flowing streams. Lightning would crackle through the sky, igniting tree canopies and frightening every creature in earshot. Winds would uproot trees or send debris flying through the air. You would have no protection from any of it. Your shelter would be shredded, your gear soaked. Hypothermia could become a real risk even in a tropical forest if your body temperature drops while you're wet, exhausted, and frightened. Water, again, is no refuge. The rivers and lakes of the Jurassic were home to massive aquatic and semi-aquatic reptiles. Crocodile forms, ancestors of today's crocodiles, lurked silently at the edges of water. Some of these, like Sarcosuchus in later periods, could grow to over 30 feet long. Even smaller ones could launch out of the water with terrifying speed. If you decided to wade into a stream to clean yourself or drink, you might not even see the danger until it was too late. And if not predators, then parasites. The water is alive with ancient microorganisms your body isn't ready for. A single swallow could bring fever and cramps that would leave you helpless. Insects of the Jurassic weren't quite like the ones today. Some were smaller, others enormous. Giant dragonflies, with wingspans approaching to feet in earlier eras, still hovered occasionally. Beetles and flies swarmed in the warmth. The buzzing never stops. The stinging is constant. You have no repellent, no long sleeves thick enough to resist their bites, and many of them might be carriers of ancient pathogens that haven't existed in millions of years. You might not even recognize the symptoms before collapsing from fever, infection, or exhaustion. You may think climbing high could save you. Up in the trees, you might hope to find safety, away from ground predators. But that strategy comes with new risks. The trees are not safe. Many of them host ancient arthropods or colonies of aggressive ants. Some trees are unstable or covered in slippery moss. Falling from a tree, even a short one, could result in broken bones, which in this environment means certain death. And from above, you could become visible to flying predators. Yes, the skies of the Jurassic were not empty. Pterosaurs, of the air glided through the sky in search of fish, insects, and small prey. While not all were dangerous to a human, some were large enough to notice you. If they perceived you as a threat or competition, you could become the subject of harassment or attack. Their wingspan stretched up to 30 feet in some later species, and their beaks were lined with teeth. And remember, these creatures didn't evolve alongside mammals like us. Your scent, your shape, your posture would all confuse them. That confusion might lead to aggression, or worse, curiosity. Let's imagine for a moment that you've found a relatively safe spot. You're not thirsty, you're not under immediate threat, and the night is calm. Even then, your body begins to betray you. Without adequate food, your blood sugar begins to drop. Without proper nutrients, your muscles weaken. Without sleep, your reflexes dull. You're becoming more vulnerable by the hour. The body is not built for long-term stress without recovery. The immune system weakens. The mind frays, hallucinations, paranoia, disorientation, all of these begin to creep in. You're not just fighting the environment now, you're fighting your own biology. And through it all, the earth keeps turning. The sun rises again. The calls of dinosaurs echo through the canopy. Somewhere nearby, a predator has caught the scent of something new, something soft, something slow. It will begin to track, step by step, through the ferns and the fog. It has all the time in the world. You don't. If you're still awake, take a slow breath and imagine the cool shade of a Jurassic forest, thick green leaves, dappled sunlight, distant thunder. You are safe now. You're not really there. Let the dangers drift away. We'll continue in the next part, as we move toward the Cretaceous period, where the giants walk heavier, and the world begins to resemble something eerily familiar, and yet still uninhabitable for someone like you. We drift now into the final and perhaps most well-known chapter of the Mesozoic era, the Cretaceous period. It is now somewhere between 145 and 66 million years ago. The Earth is in motion, its lands spreading further apart, its oceans widening, its climates shifting yet again. Flowers begin to bloom for the first time in Earth's history. Birds take flight, evolving from feathered theropod dinosaurs. Mammals remain small, mostly nocturnal, and quiet. Dinosaurs are larger, more diverse, and more specialized than ever before. This is the world most often pictured when one imagines the time of dinosaurs, and it is, in every way, even more dangerous for a human visitor than the eras before it. Let's begin by imagining that you've somehow arrived, barefoot and unprepared, in a temperate Cretaceous forest. It's early morning. A layer of mist hovers just above the ground, curling through the ferns and flowering plants. You hear chirps, bird-like but harsher. Insects buzz nearby. You're already itchy. Your skin is reacting to something in the foliage. Your clothes are soaked with dew, and your stomach is empty. You haven't eaten in a day, and now, for the first time, you're surrounded by plants that vaguely resemble things you might recognize. Primitive magnolias, early grasses, shrubs bearing unfamiliar berries. But remember, you can't eat them. You don't know what's poisonous. Many of these plants evolved chemical defenses to protect themselves from being eaten by herbivorous dinosaurs, whose stomachs were very different from yours. A single berry could leave you vomiting. Two might stop your heart. You walk, slowly, through the dense growth. But you're not alone. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a rustling noise, something large is moving through the trees. It's not fast, it's deliberate. The ground shivers beneath your feet as a massive creature approaches. This is a herbivore, an ankylosaurus perhaps. Low to the ground, covered in thick bony armor, and dragging a clubbed tail the size of your entire body behind it. It's not hunting you, but it doesn't trust you either. If you get too close, or make a sound it perceives as a threat, it could swing its tail and send your ribcage flying. Its eyes are small. Its brain is simple. It doesn't need to think. It just reacts. You back away quietly, but now your scent is in the air. Far above, soaring in lazy spirals, is a massive flying reptile, a pterosaur. This one is large, perhaps, acute. Its wings stretch over 30 feet wide. It has keen eyesight, a long toothless beak, and a strange intelligence behind its eyes. It sees movement. You prey, a threat, a curiosity. There's no way to know. It drifts slower, wings rustling like canvas in the wind. You duck beneath a tree and freeze, heart pounding. It circles once more, then glides off toward the wetlands. You've been lucky. For now, you follow a small creek, hoping to find cleaner water. The air is hot, humid, and filled with the smell of wet vegetation, rotting wood, and something else, decay. You find it soon enough. The remains of a hadrosaur lie near the water, half-eaten. Flies swarm the body. Its flesh is torn in wide arcs, teeth marks scored across bone. You look around, every sense alert. Something killed this creature recently. And where there's a kill, there's often a predator still nearby. You don't have to wait long. From between the trees, stepping silently but purposefully, comes a creature that needs no introduction. Tyrannosaurus rex. But this is not the monster from movies. It is a living, breathing apex predator. Nearly 40 feet long, with jaws that could crush bone, and a sense of smell sharper than any dog that ever lived. You are already dead, you just don't know it yet. You freeze. Maybe it hasn't seen you. But it doesn't need to see. It smells you. A strange scent. Weak, unfamiliar. Its head turns. It opens its mouth slightly. A low grunt, then a step forward. You run. You won't get far. This is not a slow creature. Despite its size, it can move quickly in short bursts. You hear it crashing through the trees behind you. Your legs are burning. Your breath is shallow. You trip. It's over. But you wake. Because, luckily, this is still just a story. Even if you survive the encounter, and that's a very generous if, you still need to rest. But the ground here isn't safe. Insects are worse than ever. Mosquitoes with ancient pathogens swarm near water. Giant ticks nest in the vegetation. Leeches cling to leaves, waiting to latch onto passing animals. You might avoid large predators for a while, but you cannot escape the small ones. Your blood, your skin, your uncalloused feet, everything is vulnerable, and the weather. While parts of the Cretaceous were warm and wet, others were dry and storm-prone. Lightning still strikes frequently. Wildfires ignite, racing through dry scrublands and grass. There is no organized firefighting. No one is coming to help. You'd see smoke from miles away, but without a clear sense of direction. You wouldn't know whether to run toward or away from it. And even if the fire missed you, the smoke wouldn't. You would cough and wheeze, your eyes would water. You'd stumble in confusion, only to fall into some crevice or sinkhole hidden by the brush. Sometimes you might think the ocean would be safer, but not in the Cretaceous. The seas are filled with predators that would make even the most seasoned divers scream. The mosasaur, a massive marine reptile with a double-hinged jaw, hunted everything from fish to other marine reptiles. Its teeth were conical and bone-crushing. The water might seem cool and peaceful at the surface, but beneath, shadows move with frightening purpose. Jellyfish, plankton blooms, and ancient algae could cause rashes, stings, or worse. Your body, used to modern ocean chemistry, might not react well to these ancient waters. Even drinking seawater could introduce bacteria your immune system has never encountered. The sky, too, is different. The air feels heavier at times. Oxygen levels were higher near the end of the Cretaceous, which made insects and arthropods larger and more active. You might find yourself chased by a beetle the size of a soup bowl, or swatting at dragonflies with wingspans nearly as wide as your forearm. At first, it might seem fascinating, but after hours without rest, without silence, the constant flapping, chirping, screeching, and buzzing would begin to wear down your sanity. You'd start to crave the silence of your own era, the artificial hum of electronics, the gentle hush of indoor life. Perhaps most tragically, you might begin to admire the dinosaurs. You'd see the majesty in a herd of triceratops moving through the plains, their massive frills catching the sunlight. You'd feel awe at the intelligence of a troodonted hunting mice-sized mammals in the underbrush. You'd feel wonder, and then sorrow because you don't belong here. The earth itself resists your presence. Every plant, every breath of air, every footstep, every shadow, it all reminds you, over and over, that this world is not yours. And so, slowly, your strength fades. You don't die from a single attack. You simply stop being able to go on. Exhaustion, hunger, dehydration, infection, exposure. These are your true enemies. The dinosaurs are only part of the story. Nature, herself, in her ancient, indifferent grandeur, would end you. As you lie down, aching and breathless, looking up at stars and constellations you don't recognize, because over millions of years, even the stars shift you, feel something small crawling over your leg. You don't have the strength to brush it off. You close your eyes. But of course, you open them again. You're in bed, safe, cool, alone. The room is dark, maybe softly lit. The soundscape has changed. No thunder lingers in the distance. No trees crack in warning. Just stillness. And we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll explore not just the animals, but the long passage of time, the millions of years that shaped and changed these creatures, these continents, and this earth. We'll examine the slow movements of the continents, the drifting of tectonic plates, and the silent but ever-present geological forces that shaped this inhospitable past. We drift now into the final and perhaps most well-known chapter of the Mesozoic era, the Cretaceous period. It is now somewhere between 145 and 66 million years ago. The Earth is in motion, its land spreading further apart, its oceans widening, its climates shifting yet again. Flowers begin to bloom for the first time in Earth's history. Birds take flight, evolving from feathered theropod dinosaurs. Mammals remain small, mostly nocturnal, and quiet. Dinosaurs are larger, more diverse, and more specialized than ever before. This is the world most often pictured when one imagines the time of dinosaurs, and it is, in every way, even more dangerous for a human visitor than the eras before it. Let's begin by imagining that you've somehow arrived, barefoot and unprepared, in a temperate Cretaceous forest. It's early morning. A layer of mist hovers just above the ground, curling through the ferns and flowering plants. You hear chirps bird-like, but harsher. Insects buzz nearby. You're already itchy. Your skin is reacting to something in the foliage. Your clothes are soaked with dew, and your stomach is empty. You haven't eaten in a day. And now, for the first time, you're surrounded by plants that vaguely resemble things you might recognize. Primitive magnolias, early grasses, shrubs bearing unfamiliar berries. But remember, you can't eat them. You don't know what's poisonous. Many of these plants evolved chemical defenses to protect themselves from being eaten by herbivorous dinosaurs, whose stomachs were very different from yours. A single berry could leave you vomiting. Two might stop your heart. You walk slowly through the dense growth, but you're not alone. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a rustling noise, something large is moving through the trees. It's not fast, it's deliberate. The ground shivers beneath your feet as a massive creature approaches. This is a herbivore, an ankylosaurus perhaps. Low to the ground, covered in thick bony armor, and dragging a clubbed tail the size of your entire body behind it. It's not hunting you, but it doesn't trust you either. If you get too close, or make a sound it perceives as a threat, it could swing its tail and send your ribcage flying. Its eyes are small, its brain is simple. It doesn't need to think, it just reacts. You back away quietly, but now your scent is in the air. Far above, soaring in lazy spirals, is a massive flying reptile, a pterosaur. This one is large, perhaps a quetzalcoatlus. Its wings stretch over 30 feet wide. It has keen eyesight, a long toothless beak, and a strange intelligence behind its eyes. It sees movement. You prey. A threat, a curiosity. There's no way to know. It drifts lower, wings rustling like canvas in the wind. You duck beneath a tree and freeze, heart pounding. It circles once more, then glides off toward the wetlands. You've been lucky. For now, you follow a small creek, hoping to find cleaner water. The air is hot, humid, and filled with the smell of wet vegetation, rotting wood, and something else, decay. You find it soon enough. The remains of a hadrosaur lie near the water, half-eaten. Flies swarm the body. Its flesh is torn in wide arcs. Teeth marks scored across bone. You look around, every sense alert. Something killed this creature recently. And where there's a kill, there's often a predator still nearby. You don't have to wait long. From between the trees, stepping silently but purposefully, comes a creature that needs no introduction. Tyrannosaurus rex. But this is not the monster from movies. It is a living, breathing apex predator. Nearly 40 feet long, with jaws that could crush bone, and a sense of smell sharper than any dog that ever lived. You are already dead, you just don't know it yet. You freeze. Maybe it hasn't seen you, but it doesn't need to see. It smells you. A strange scent, weak, unfamiliar. Its head turns. It opens its mouth slightly. A low grunt, then a step forward. You run. You won't get far. This is not a slow creature. Despite its size, it can move quickly in short bursts. You hear it crashing through the trees behind you. Your legs are burning. Your breath is shallow. You trip. It's over, but you wake. Because, luckily, this is still just a story, even if you survived the encounter, and that's a very generous if. You still need to rest. But the ground here isn't safe. Insects are worse than ever. Mosquitoes with ancient pathogens swarm near water. Giant ticks nest in the vegetation. Leeches cling to leaves, waiting to latch on to passing animals. You might avoid large predators for a while, but you cannot escape the small ones. Your blood, your skin, your uncalloused feet, everything is vulnerable. And the weather, well, parts of the Cretaceous were warm and wet, others were dry and lightning still strikes frequently. Wildfires ignite, racing through dry scrublands and grass. There is no organized firefighting. No one is coming to help. You'd see smoke from miles away, but without a clear sense of direction, you wouldn't know whether to run toward or away from it. And even if the fire missed you, the smoke wouldn't. You would cough and wheeze. Your eyes would water. You'd stumble in confusion, only to fall into some crevice or sinkhole hidden by the brush. Sometimes, you might think the ocean would be safer, but not in the Cretaceous. The seas are filled with predators that would make even the most seasoned diver scream. The mosasaur, a massive marine reptile with a double-hinged jaw, hunted everything from fish to other marine reptiles. Its teeth were conical and bone-crushing. The water might seem cool and peaceful at the surface, but beneath, shadows move with frightening purpose. Jellyfish, plankton blooms, and ancient algae could cause rashes, stings, or worse. Your body, used to modern ocean chemistry, might not react well to these ancient waters. Even drinking seawater could introduce bacteria your immune system has never encountered. The sky, too, is different. The air feels heavier at times. Oxygen levels were higher near the end of the Cretaceous, which made insects and arthropods larger and more active. You might find yourself chased by a beetle the size of a soup bowl, or swatting at dragonflies with wingspans nearly as wide as your forearm. At first, it might seem fascinating, but after hours without rest, without silence, the constant flapping, chirping, screeching, and buzzing would begin to wear down your sanity. You'd start to crave the silence of your own era, the artificial hum of electronics, the gentle hush of indoor life. Perhaps most tragically, you might begin to admire the dinosaurs. You'd see the majesty in a herd of triceratops moving through the plains, their massive frills catching the sunlight. You'd feel awe at the intelligence of a troodonted hunting mice-sized mammals in the underbrush. You'd feel wonder, and then sorrow because you don't belong here. The earth itself resists your presence. Every plant, every breath of air, every footstep, every shadow, it all reminds you, over and over, that this world is not yours. And so, slowly, your strength fades. You don't die from a single attack. You simply stop being able to go on. Exhaustion, hunger, dehydration, infection, exposure. These are your true enemies. The dinosaurs are only part of the story. Nature herself, in her ancient indifferent grandeur, would end you as you lie down, aching and breathless, looking up at stars and constellations you don't recognize, because over millions of years, even the stars shift. You feel something small crawling over your leg. You don't have the strength to brush it off. You close your eyes, but of course, you open them again. You're in bed, safe, cool, alone. The room is dark, maybe softly lit. The soundscape has changed. No thunder lingers in the distance. No trees crack in warning. Just stillness. And we're not done yet. In the next part, we'll explore not just the animals, but the long passage of time the millions of years that shaped and changed these creatures, these continents, and this Earth. We'll examine the slow movements of the continents, the drifting of tectonic plates, and the silent but ever-present geological forces that shape this inhospitable past. Let us now look upward, for while the ground crawled and shifted, and forests teemed with danger, the skies above were no sanctuary either. In the age of dinosaurs, the air was not empty, it was alive. The world above you was filled with wings, feathers alone, but membranes stretched across long-fingered limbs. Creatures more ancient than birds, older than butterflies, older even than bees, ruled the open sky. These were the pterosaurs. Often mistaken for dinosaurs, pterosaurs were something else entirely, a separate branch of the reptile family tree, cousins rather than siblings. They evolved flight long before birds, and in many ways, they mastered it more completely. Some were no larger than sparrows, flitting silently through the air in search of insects. Others, like the mighty Quetzalcoatlus, rivaled modern aircraft. In wingspan, its wings could stretch over 30 feet wide, casting long shadows over lakes, plains, and forests. It stood as tall as a giraffe, with a beak long enough to swallow a small human whole. It was not a monster, it was not evil, but it was indifferent to your presence, and perfectly designed to survive. You would hear them before you saw them. Not with a roar, but with the soft, leathery rush of air over wing membranes. Sometimes they soared high on thermal updrafts, silent and slow, circling like vultures. Sometimes they dove with sudden speed, targeting fish near the water's surface, or small scurrying animals on the ground. They had keen eyesight, much keener than yours. You could not hide from them. Even your heartbeat, quickened by fear, would betray you. They knew the rhythm of life in this world. You were not part of it. A smaller pterosaur might simply observe you, curious, but a larger one could be dangerous. Not just because of its size or strength, but because of how little it would understand you. Your shape, your scent, your movements all wrong. It might see you as prey, or as a threat, or simply as something new. And new, in a world of survival, often means dangerous. Better to strike first. Now imagine trying to sleep under this sky. You lie under the twisted branches of a tree, hoping for some protection. But you are exposed. Above, something glides past, blotting out the stars. It lands nearby, walking on all fours, its long beak dipping and probing through the underbrush. It makes no sound, you barely dare to breathe. This is no bird. This is a reptile of the air, evolved not for comfort, but for perfect balance between bone, muscle, and motion. You are a trespasser, and it knows. You might think birds would be more familiar, and in some ways they are. But early birds were not like robins or sparrows. They were closer to dinosaurs, with teeth in their beaks, claws on their wings, and long feathered tails. Archaeopteryx, often called the first bird, could glide and flutter, but not soar. It lived in the late Jurassic, flitting through forest canopies, feeding on insects and small reptiles. It was intelligent by reptile standards, but not by yours. Still, it could navigate the sky in ways you never could. As birds evolved, they became more specialized. Some hunted in packs, others alone. Some adapted for life in dense forests, others for open plains. Their feathers were not only for flight, but for insulation, display, and mating. Bright colors signaled fitness, patterns warned of danger. In the Cretaceous, birds like Ichthyornis developed powerful wings, sharp beaks, and precise coordination. They dove into water like spears, emerging with fish. To them, your clumsy movements would seem laughable. But even if you were ignored by the predators of the sky, the environment itself would wear you down. The air pressure was different. Oxygen levels were sometimes higher, sometimes lower, depending on the era. Your lungs, adapted for modern atmosphere, would not adjust easily. You might find yourself lightheaded or gasping after mild exertion. Climbing a hill would feel like scaling a mountain. Your muscles would ache with effort. Your ears might pop, confused by the ancient altitude and density. The sky was thinner here, or thicker, always unfamiliar, and storms, those great sculptors of the sky, were more powerful. With more heat in the atmosphere, and with different land sea distributions, the storms of the Mesozoic were unpredictable. Thunderheads could build over warm inland seas, then sweep inland without warning. Lightning struck with greater frequency, and fires often followed. The pterosaurs might sense the shifts in pressure and take shelter. You would not. You would be caught in it, soaked and shivering, exposed to wind-driven debris and pounding rain. Your shelter, a tree, a rock, a cave, might become a trap. At night, there were no city lights, no electrical glow, only starlight and moonlight, and the eyes of nocturnal hunters. Some pterosaurs flew at night. Some birds hunted in the dark. Their vision was better than yours. They saw in infrared. They detected motion where you saw stillness. You would be blind in the darkness, blind and alone. Even the sounds would be strange. Calls and screeches unlike anything in the modern world. Echoes of wings. The flap of air stirred by muscles you couldn't comprehend. These were not the peaceful coos of pigeons or the song of a mourning dove. These were sounds born of an alien sky, a sky that never invited you, never welcomed you. And yet, the creatures of the air thrived. They filled every niche. They glided over deserts, fished in coastal lagoons, nested in cliffs. Their bones were hollow, but their instincts were sharp. They felt the wind like an extension of their minds. They rode it, bent it, shaped their lives around it. You, with your heavy bones and grounded gait, were an intruder, earthbound, breathless, and slow. By the end of the Cretaceous, birds had already begun to diversify in ways that would carry them through the mass extinction to come. Some would survive, most would not. But they were ready. They had the tools. You did not. To survive the sky of the dinosaurs, you would need more than luck. You would need wings, not just in form, but in thought. You would need to feel the air, read its currents, understand its rules. But you can't. You never could. And so, the sky, like the land and the sea, would reject you. As you return now to your modern bed, your safe space, remember this: flight is a gift of time. It took millions of years to perfect, and even then, it was never safe. But it was beautiful. In the next part, we will return to the ground to witness one of the most haunting realities of the Mesozoic: the extinction events, slow collapses, sudden ends, the quiet unraveling of ecosystems, and the final day of the dinosaurs. Let us now walk together toward the end, not with panic, not with sudden alarm, but with the slow, almost imperceptible rhythm by which most things in nature fade. For though we often imagine the extinction of the dinosaurs as a single violent, momentane explosion, a flash, an instant, the truth is more complicated. Most extinction is not swift, it is silent. It comes in waves, in whispers, in losses that go unnoticed. A species here, a forest there. The disappearance of a sound that no one quite remembers. The change of a season by a few uncertain days. For millions of years before the final cataclysm, the world was already changing. Sea levels were falling. The shallow inland seas that had once divided continents began to retreat. Coastal habitats shrank. Coral reefs collapsed. Ocean currents shifted. What had once been warm and teeming became cold and still. Plankton, the tiny engines of the sea, declined in numbers. And with them, the food chain began to unwind. Large marine reptiles, like mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, became less common. Fish populations dwindled. The ocean darkened, not with shadow, but with absence. On land, volcanic activity surged in what is now India. The Deccan traps erupted again and again, for tens of thousands of years. Great floods of lava spilled across the land. The sky filled with ash and gas. Sulfur dioxide rose into the atmosphere, mixing with water to create acid rain. Forests withered. Ferns and flowering plants struggled to recover. Climate swung between extremes: short cold snaps, followed by long humid warmth. These were not conditions you could survive. The air itself was toxic. The rain burned. The sky, once a canvas of motion, became a haze. The dinosaurs endured as long as they could. Herbivores grew larger to access the higher canopies, or smaller to conserve energy. Carnivores adapted by hunting new prey or scavenging what they could. But with each shift in the environment, fewer niches remained. The world was becoming less predictable. Ecosystems that had lasted millions of years were unraveling. And then, one day, something changed that no adaptation could match. Roughly 66 million years ago, an object from space entered Earth's atmosphere. It may have been a comet, more likely, an asteroid. Perhaps 6 miles wide, traveling faster than any sound or scream. It struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, creating what we call the Chicxulub crater. But you would not have called it that. You would have had no name for it, only fear. The impact was not just an explosion, it was the end of a chapter in Earth's deep history. The blast vaporized everything within hundreds of miles. Forests turned to flame. Oceans rose in tsunamis taller than skyscrapers. The shockwaves circled the globe. Earth itself rang like a bell. Molten rock was ejected into space, only to rain down minutes later as tiny glass spirals, heating the atmosphere in a broiling wave of energy. Across the globe, wildfires ignited spontaneously. For hours, maybe even days, the surface of the earth burned. You would not have survived this. You would not have even seen it coming. There would be no warning. The animals, perhaps, sensed something. In the final seconds, a change in the air pressure, a sound outside the range of your hearing, a vibration in the soil, but there would be no escape, no safe place to hide, no prayer to offer. The world would go silent not in peace, but in shock. In the days that followed, the sun disappeared behind clouds of ash and soot. Global temperatures plummeted. Photosynthesis halted. Plants withered. The food chain collapsed completely. Large animals died quickly. The dinosaurs, whose strength had once ruled the land, starved. Some tried to move, to migrate, to adapt, but there was nowhere left to go. The earth had changed too fast. Marine life suffered just as badly. The tiny plankton, which had already declined, now vanished almost entirely. Coral reefs died. Fish and marine reptiles followed. The oceans became quiet, heavy, lifeless. But not everything perished. Some small mammals survived in burrows. Some birds, descendants of dinosaurs, endured by scavenging or eating seeds. Crocodiles, turtles, and some amphibians survived by retreating to aquatic environments, where the temperature was more stable. Insects, too, found ways to persist. Life, as always, did not end. It changed. But if you had been there, even tucked in a cave, or huddled beneath the earth, your chances would have been near zero. You would have no food, no light, no warmth. You could not digest raw plants. You could not live off insects. You would not know how to recognize edible roots, or catch the few scuttling survivors. Even your clean water, if it existed, at all, might have been poisoned by ash and sulfur. Your story would end in darkness, quiet, cold. The extinction event, what scientists call the Cretaceous Paleogene or KPG extinction, erased nearly 75% of all species on Earth. It marked the end of the dinosaurs, the end of the pterosaurs, the end of ammonites, and so many others. But it also cleared the way for something new. Mammals, once small and hidden, began to rise. Over millions of years, they diversified. Some returned to the sea, some climbed trees, some eventually walked on 2 legs. You are part of that story, but only because of extinction. And so we sit now in a time unimaginably distant from the world of the dinosaurs. But the earth remembers, in its rocks, in its fossils, in the quiet places where time moves slowly. The world that killed the dinosaurs made room for you, but it did not do so kindly. It did not plan. It did not forgive. It simply moved forward as you rest. Think of the long silence that followed the asteroid strike. No footsteps, no roars, no birdsong, just smoke, just ash, just time. In the next part, we will explore how scientists know all of this, how fossils form, how we date rocks, and how tiny clues in stone reveal entire vanished worlds. A calm journey through the science of memory. Close your eyes now and imagine not a jungle, not a desert, not a swamp or storm, but a laboratory. Quiet, sterile, cold fluorescent light casts long shadows on smooth surfaces. There is no roar of beasts here, no shaking of the ground. Only stone, and silence, and the careful brushing of dust from rock. This is the other side of the dinosaur story. This is how we know. For if you were to step into the age of dinosaurs, you would die. But if you were to stay here, in the safety of your time, you could still reach backward, across eons, through layers of earth, into lost worlds buried just beneath your feet. Fossils do not shout, they whisper, and only the patient can hear. The process begins with death, not dramatic, not cinematic, but quiet. A dinosaur falls, perhaps to illness, perhaps to age, perhaps to something as ordinary as hunger. Its body lies in the mud, in a shallow stream, or in the shadow of a tree long gone. Carrion feeders come, insects swarm, wind and rain erode, and slowly, gently, the soft parts of the body disappear. But the bones may remain, not forever, but long enough. If the conditions are just right, if the body is quickly buried beneath silt or sand, or volcanic ash, oxygen is cut off, bacteria cannot work as efficiently, time slows down, and over thousands, then millions of years, the bone becomes stone. Mineral-rich water flows through the pores. Bit by bit, molecule by molecule, the original structure is replaced with minerals. Like silica, what remains is no longer bone, but a perfect rock replica. A fossil. This process is rare. Most organisms decay entirely. The odds of any one dinosaur becoming fossilized are vanishingly small. The odds of that fossil being found, smaller still. But even the tiniest fragment can speak. A tooth, a claw, a single vertebra. They tell stories not with words, but with shape, with size, with wear patterns and microfractures. Paleontology's patient seekers of time study these fragments with reverence. They record each curve, each ridge. They compare it to others. They place it in the great puzzle of evolution, and slowly, piece by piece, they reconstruct lives. Not perfectly, not with certainty, but with care. They use tools both old and new, tiny brushes, dental picks, CT scanners, lasers, electron microscopes. Every scratch is measured, every fossil mapped. These are the archaeologists of deep time. They do not look for treasure. They look for truth, and to know how old these bones are, scientists turn to the rocks that surround them. Fossils are dated not by the fossils themselves, but by the layers of earth in which they are found. The deeper the layer, the older the fossil usually. But for greater precision, scientists use radiometric dating. Here's how it works. Certain elements in rocks are unstable. They decay over time, changing from one element to another at a known rate. By measuring the ratio between the original element and its decay product, scientists can calculate how long the rock has been sitting undisturbed. It's like reading the ticks of a cosmic clock. The most famous of these clocks is dating, used for very old rocks. Others, like potassium-argon or argon-argon dating, are used for slightly younger material. Carbon dating, you may have heard of, but it's only useful for relatively recent remains, no older than about 50,000 years. Dinosaurs are far too ancient for that. In this way, we've come to learn the span of the Mesozoic era, though. Age of Dinosaurs. We know it began around 252 million years ago, after the worst mass extinction Earth has ever seen. We know it ended 66 million years ago, with the asteroid. We divide it into 3 periods: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and the Cretaceous. These divisions are not arbitrary. They reflect changes in climate, in life, in extinction and emergence. Each period is marked in stone. But fossils do not only tell us about skeletons, they tell us about behavior. Footprints preserved in ancient mud become trackways. A line of 3-toed prints reveals not just the size of a dinosaur, but its speed, its gait, even whether it limped. A cluster of nests fossilized with eggs inside shows how some species cared for their young. Fossilized stomach contents called gastroliths tell us what they ate. Coprolites or fossilized droppings reveal even more: digestion, diet, parasites even. Impressions of skin and feathers have been found, preserved in fine-grained rock. They show texture, pattern, sometimes even pigment. With this we can imagine not just the skeletons of dinosaurs, but their colors, their camouflage, their display structures. They become real again, not statues, but animals. All of this information must be interpreted. Hypotheses are tested, mistakes are corrected. Science changes, For a long time, dinosaurs were thought to be cold-blooded, sluggish, tail-dragging reptiles. Now we know many were warm-blooded, fast, and dynamic. Some even had feathers. The story is not fixed. It evolves, just like life. And sometimes, fossils are found where they are least expected. In deserts, on mountaintops, in quarries and road cuts, because the earth is not still. Plates shift, mountains rise, oceans fall. What was once a riverbed becomes dry stone. What was once a forest becomes frozen tundra. The past is never far, just hidden. And so we dig, carefully, lovingly, listening to the whispers of rock and time. To find one fossil may take years, to understand it, decades. But in the end, these silent stones speak more clearly than any words. They tell us we were not the first, that the earth was old long before we arrived, that life is fragile, that survival is rare. You, lying now in your modern bed, warm and safe, live in a time built on the ruins of ancient worlds. Each fossil is a reminder that time is long, that memory is buried deep, that even in extinction, there is knowledge. In the next part, we'll look at the strange creatures that lived before the dinosaurs, the forgotten rulers of the Permian period, the Great Dying, and the reset that paved the way for the rise of the dinosaurs. Before there were dinosaurs, there was something else, something older, stranger, less remembered, and far more alien than most imagine. A world without flowering plants, without birdsong, without even the chirping of insects as we know them. Today, a world whose life forms wore unfamiliar shapes, and whose skies held unfamiliar smells. This was the Permian period. It began over 298 million years ago and ended around 252 million years ago. Long before the first dinosaur ever walked the earth, the continents were fused into a single massive landmass called Pangaea supercontinent, so vast that the interior regions may have been as dry as deserts and as windy as dust bowls. Imagine standing in the middle of that ancient plain. You would see no grass, no wheat, no flowers, just bare soil, strange ferns, seed ferns, and towering conifer-like trees. In the wetter regions, the sun might hang low in the sky, casting a pale orange glow through thick, dusty air. The wind would howl. You wouldn't last long here. The atmosphere was different. The oxygen levels lower than you're used to. The climate swung between long dry periods and sudden floods. The very soil lacked the structure you'd know. Dense root networks to hold it together. When storms came, they scoured the land. And yet, life flourished in its own peculiar way. On land, the dominant animals were not dinosaurs, not yet. Instead, they were synapsids, distant ancestors of mammals. These weren't reptiles, not quite, though they looked like them. They were a strange transitional group between reptilian and mammalian traits. One of the most famous was Dimetrodon, with its massive sail-shaped spine. People often mistake it for a dinosaur, but it lived long before them, tens of millions of years before the first true dinosaur ever hatched. Dimetrodon was a predator, four-legged, low-slung, with sharp teeth and a heavy skull. Its sail may have helped regulate body temperature, capturing sunlight in the morning and dissipating heat in the afternoon. Or it may have been for display an evolutionary billboard to attract mates or warn rivals. We may never know for certain. These were the apex predators of their time, stalking vast, dry floodplains and semi-arid basins. There were herbivores, too, such as the broad-bodied Edaphosaurus, which also bore a sail, though it fed on tough fibrous plants. And then there were odd creatures like Estimenosuchus, with a head crowned by bony protrusions like the antlers of a dream. It's hard to find anything quite like them today. These animals belonged to a lost lineage. Their shapes were experiments, forms, nature tested and later abandoned. In the oceans, life teemed as well. There were trilobites, though fading by this time, in massive schools of ammonoids, shelled relatives of squid and octopuses. Coral reefs of the Permian were unlike today's, often built not by corals but by sponges and algae. Brachiopods, crinoids, and bryozoans covered the seafloor, forming dense marine carpets that waved with the tides. It was a complex, balanced web of life, but that balance did not last. At the end of the Permian period, something happened, something catastrophic, something so enormous that it is still the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. We call it the Great Dying Dot. It began slowly. Volcanic activity increased dramatically in what is now Siberia. The Siberian traps erupted for hundreds of thousands of years, releasing massive quantities of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. The atmosphere warmed. The oceans became acidic. Anoxic oxygen levels dropped. The sea turned from blue to green to black. Microbial blooms suffocated marine ecosystems. On land, temperatures soared. Acid rain fell. Plant life withered. Soil eroded. Rivers choked with mud. As Earth changed, species disappeared. First the delicate ones, then the large, then the resilient. It is estimated that over 90% of marine species went extinct. On land, about 70% of vertebrate species vanished. Whole ecological structures collapsed. It wasn't just animals, it was fungi, plants, insects, plankton. The biosphere was unraveling. If you had stood on Earth during this time, you would have watched the world grow quiet. Each season, fewer sounds, fewer colors, fewer movements. The forests would thin, the rivers would run empty. The air would feel thick, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Recovery took millions of years. The Earth does not rush. When life finally began to rebound, it emerged in new forms. The survivors of the Permian were small, tough, opportunistic. They were not the kings of their age, they were the rats and weeds of their time. But they endured. Among these survivors were the archosaurs, the group that would eventually give rise to crocodiles, pterosaurs, and dinosaurs. They started small, unimpressive, background fauna in a recovering world, but over time, they diversified. As the Triassic period began, new ecosystems took shape. The scars of the extinction remained, but life found a way to return. You owe your very existence to that extinction. For without it, the archosaurs may never have risen. Dinosaurs may never have emerged. Mammals may never have followed. Your evolutionary story is built on ruins. Mass extinction is not rare. It has happened more than once. It will happen again. But from ruin comes opportunity, though never for those who perish, only for those lucky enough to survive. And so, the Permian ends, and the Triassic begins. The first true dinosaurs will soon appear, not yet dominant, not yet famous, but quietly taking their place in the ancient web of life. In the next part we will enter the Triassic period, a time of rebuilding, of strange beasts, and of the quiet, unnoticed birth of the dinosaurs. When the Earth took its first quiet breath after the Great Dying, the land was still ash-colored, fragmented. The seas were strangely calm. It was the beginning of the Triassic period, a geologic chapter that began around 252 million years ago and would last nearly 50 million years. If you stood then, surrounded by the rock, scarred terrain of a planet recovering from devastation, you wouldn't recognize much. The forests were gone, the rivers muddied. Life was beginning again, almost from scratch, but life is patient. The Triassic began slowly, almost hesitantly. Fewer species meant less competition. Ecosystems were unstable, simple but open. It was an evolutionary blank canvas. A few hardy plants, the ancestors of today's conifers, cycads and ginkgos, reclaiming riverbanks and uplands. Insects re-emerged, cautious and few. Then the animals followed. The early Triassic was dominated, not by dinosaurs, but by archosaurs, a group of reptiles that would eventually give rise to crocodiles, birds, and yes, dinosaurs. At first, they were small, slender, light-footed. Many were bipedal, running on two legs, with long tails stretched behind them for balance. They hunted insects and tiny vertebrates. Their footprints marked the dried stream beds and redstone layers of long-lost valleys. Another group, called therapsids, distant relatives of mammals, also tried to reclaim the world. These were survivors from the Permian period, but they were beginning to fade. The archosaurs, better suited to the new, warmer, more volatile climate, began to outcompete them. Over time, the archosaurs split into two great lineages. One would lead to crocodilians, the other, to dinosaurs. The world of the Triassic was dry. Vast deserts stretched across much of Pangaea. Rain was infrequent, but when it came, it was violent. Thunderstorms lashed the plains. Seasonal monsoons carved gullies and temporary lakes. These shifting environments favored adaptable creatures. In this unpredictable world, some reptiles took to the skies. These were the earliest pterosaurs, not birds, and not dinosaurs, but their close cousins. With wings formed by stretched membranes of skin, supported by elongated fingers, they glided over canyons and coasts, hunting insects or small fish. Their bones were light and hollow, their skulls elongated, often filled with rows of thin, sharp teeth. In the oceans, too, reptiles returned. Ichthyosaurs streamlined, dolphin-like reptiles roamed the seas, along with nothosaurs and early plesiosaurs. Life underwater was recovering faster than on land, with coral reefs and mollusks bouncing back. Ammonites, with their spiral shells, became widespread, marking time in their ever-expanding whirls back on land. The first true dinosaurs began to appear around 230 million years ago, but they did not arrive as giants. There were no triceratops. These early dinosaurs were small, fast, and surprisingly bird-like. Some of the earliest known include Earaptor, Heterosaurus, and Stoig. They were lightly built, with hollow bones and long tails. Many were likely agile hunters, pursuing insects, lizards, and even other small reptiles. Eoraptor, one of the most primitive dinosaurs known, was just over a meter long. It had sharp teeth, strong legs, and a body built for speed. It didn't dominate its world, it merely survived in it. In these early days, dinosaurs were not yet the kings of the land. They coexisted with many other reptilian groups, some larger, more powerful, and better adapted to the moment. But they had traits that would one day help them rise. Efficient respiration, strong hips, upright posture. They were built for endurance, for heat, for change. As the Triassic continued, Earth changed again. Volcanic activity increased. The climate fluctuated more dramatically. Sea levels rose and fell. Mass extinction struck again, smaller than the Permian disaster, but still significant. Many dominant reptile groups went extinct at the end of the Triassic, clearing the ecological stage. And once again, as before, it was the survivors who would shape the future. This time, the survivors were the dinosaurs. With their competitors gone, dinosaurs spread quickly across the planet. The Jurassic period was about to begin, and the stage was set for giants. But in this part of their story, the dinosaurs are still humble, small, fast, watchful. They lurk at the forest's edge. They skitter across the riverbank. They wait quietly for their time to come. You would not notice them. If you stood still in the quiet heat of a Triassic afternoon, you might hear the rustle of leaves, or the high-pitched trill of an ancient insect. A shadow might flit past, small, featherless, cautious. A dinosaur. But nothing like what you imagine. The Earth is always between disasters. Life blooms, then falls. And what comes next is rarely what you expect. In the next part, we will enter the Jurassic period, a time of green jungles, soaring giants, and the rise of the true dinosaur. Dynasties. The Triassic period ended, as so many chapters in Earth's story do, with fire, flood, and silence. Another extinction, not as severe as the Permian, but disruptive enough to wipe out many of the dominant reptiles of the time. And in the silence that followed, something new began to stir. The world was changing once more. The continents were still mostly fused into the supercontinent Pangaea, but slowly, imperceptibly, it had started to split. Cracks widened into valleys. Valleys deepened into seas. Climate patterns shifted. Rain became more regular. Deserts gave way to forests. And into this lush, changing landscape stepped the dinosaurs, no longer small, marginal creatures at the edge of ecosystems, but rising giants. This was the Jurassic period. It began about 201 million years ago, and would last until around 145 million years ago. If you were to wake up in the early Jurassic, you might at first believe you were dreaming. Thick, fern-filled forests surrounded you. Giant conifers reached to the sky. Ginkgos spread broad fan-shaped leaves overhead. Horsetails clustered by the water's edge, rising like reed towers. There were no grasses, yet no flowers either. but the green was dense and unbroken. The air was warm, heavy with moisture. Mist clung to the undergrowth, and in this vast, humid world, the dinosaurs had begun their quiet takeover. Some grew tall. Brachiosaurus, for instance, walked the earth during the late Jurassic. With its long neck held high like a living crane, it could reach into the tops of conifer trees that other herbivores couldn't dream of touching. Its nostrils sat atop its head, and its limbs were thick as columns. A full-grown adult might weigh over 50 tons. You could walk beneath its belly and be lost in shadow. Others grew swift. Ornitholists, a small carnivore, ran on 2 legs and used its speed to pursue prey. It likely hunted lizards, early mammals, and perhaps even baby dinosaurs. Then there was Dilophosaurus, with twin crests on its scolla, predator larger than you might expect. Capable of dispatching prey with sharp claws and strong jaws, predators and prey alike grew larger in the Jurassic. But the arms race was not only about size. Armor began to appear to creatures like Stegosaurus, developed plates along their backs, and spikes on their tails, perhaps for defense, or display, or to help regulate heat. These animals walked on all fours, dragging their tails like battle clubs behind them. A pair of Allosaurus, stalking nearby, might think twice before attacking one. The skies also came alive in new ways. Pterosaurs, already present in the Triassic, diversified and flourished. Some had wingspans of over 20 feet, gliding effortlessly above the treetops. They were not birds not yet, but they were flying reptiles, adapted to a niche that no other vertebrates had yet claimed. Their wings, supported by an extended finger, were thin and leathery, catching every breeze and thermal dot, and somewhere, hidden in the canopy, small feathered dinosaurs began to appear. Feathers, not yet for flight, but perhaps for warmth, or for display. These were creatures like Anchiornis, lightweight and bird-like. They scurried across branches, leaped between trunks, and chirped softly in the dark. Evolution was laying groundwork here for birds, for beaks, for songs. In the underbrush tiny mammals also lived. They were nocturnal, insectivorous, and cautious. They came out at night, their warm blood giving them an edge. When the temperature dipped, they were not dominant, not yet, but they would wait patiently, in the shadows for their chance. It would take many millions of years, and many disasters, for that moment to come. The Earth in the Jurassic was dominated not by individuals, but by patterns. Climate patterns, migration patterns, evolutionary patterns. Dinosaurs rose and spread across the globe, not because they were chosen, but because they were lucky. They were efficient. Their lungs, more advanced than those of earlier reptiles, allowed them to draw oxygen more effectively. Their posture, upright and balanced, helped them move quickly and with endurance. Their eggs could be laid on land, in nests, in groups. These weren't monsters. They weren't aliens. They were animals, just like any other. Living, breeding, feeding, fighting, raising young, migrating with the seasons. You wouldn't last a day in their world. The air would feel strange in your lungs. The sunlight too intense. The food inedible. The danger constant. And yet, if you stood still enough, you might witness something extraordinary. A herd of Camarasaurus moving slowly across the plains, their tails swaying like pendulums, their footsteps sending tremors through the soil. A pack of Allosaurus watching from a hilltop, eyes scanning for the weak or the young. Above them, the silhouettes of pterosaurs catching the last warm currents of evening light. And somewhere, deep in the trees, a small creature with feathers chirps to its mate. The Jurassic was not just an age of giants. It was an age of innovation. Evolution was experimenting, testing flight color, armor, cooperation, parental care. Many of these ideas would survive. Some would fade. But the threads woven during this time would shape the rest of life's story. You're standing in the middle of that story now. A single chapter, in a single book, on a single planet, orbiting a single star. In the next part, we'll move into the late Jurassic and early Cretaceous, a time of even greater diversity, more complex ecosystems, and the arrival of truly strange dinosaurs. As millions of years passed, the Earth continued its quiet, relentless transformation. The late Jurassic flowed slowly into the early Cretaceous, like ink spreading across ancient parchment. From about 160 million to 100 million years ago, the planet shifted once more, reshaping oceans and continents, climates and creatures. Dinosaurs continued to thrive, but the ecosystems they inhabited became more complex, more varied, and in many ways, more familiar to the modern eye. The supercontinent Pangaea was no longer whole. It had cracked and fractured like old ceramic. Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south were moving steadily apart, carried on tectonic plates like driftwood on an invisible tide. As continents split, new coastlines formed. Inland seas advanced, the climate changed, becoming more humid in some places, drier in others. These changes created new niches, new opportunities, and the dinosaurs, ever adaptable, filled them. In the late Jurassic, the great sauropods continued to dominate. Diplodocus, with its impossibly long neck and whip-like tail, stretched over 80 feet in length. It browsed low to the ground, stripping ferns and cycads. Its cousin Apatosaurus, once called Brontosaurus, was shorter and stockier, with heavier bones and a deep chest. Their skeletons, when reconstructed, looked like bridges. Their footprints formed trails across soft ancient sediments, still visible in dry canyons today, but by the early Cretaceous, the sauropods were evolving. In South America, one lineage gave rise to the Titanosaurs enormous, heavily built herbivores like Argentinosaurus, which may have reached over 100 feet in length. These were among the largest land animals ever to walk the earth. Their massive legs supported towering bodies. Their small heads swayed at the end of necks like cranes. Some titanosaurs had bony plates embedded in their skin for protection, like a kind of primitive armor. On the predator side, changes were happening too. In North America, allosaurids were being joined by new kinds of theropods, more agile, more specialized. In Europe and Asia, the early relatives of what would become Tyrannosaurus rex were beginning their evolutionary journey. Small, feathered, fast, not yet kings, but ambitious. Some dinosaurs became covered in primitive feathers, not for flight, but for insulation, for mating displays, perhaps even for brooding over nests. Feathers were a quiet revolution. They marked a shift not just in form, but in behavior. These creatures were no longer just scaly, cold-blooded monsters. Some were warm, social, parental. One such dinosaur was Uranus, a 30-foot-long feathered predator from what is now China. Though related to tyrannosaurs, it was covered in a thick, downy coat of protofeathers, helping it survive in cooler climates. It showed that even large dinosaurs could be feathered, challenging long-held assumptions. And below the trees, among the roots and leaf litter, small, bird-like dinosaurs scurried. Some were omnivores, some insectivores, some predators of even smaller prey. One was Deinonychus, a raptor with a sickle-shaped claw on each foot. It moved with eerie grace, perhaps hunting in packs, communicating with chirps or whistles. Another Microraptor had feathers not only on its arms, but on its legs as well. It could glide from branch to branch, bridging the gap between dinosaur and bird. Speaking of birds, their story was taking shape now. The earliest true bird, Archaeopteryx, had already taken flight in the late Jurassic. It had wings, feathers, and a wishbone, but it also had teeth, a long bony tail, and claws on its wings. It was a mosaic of old and new. Evolution does not draw straight lines. By the early Cretaceous, birds were diversifying. Some had beaks, others still had teeth. Many retained clawed fingers, long tails, and primitive wing shapes. They lived in trees, by rivers, near lakes. They were small, fast, and increasingly capable of sustained flight. Insects buzzed in the air. Early flowering plants began to appear. The earth was starting to resemble something faintly modern. Meanwhile, in the oceans, marine reptiles flourished. Plesiosaurs glided through shallow seas, with their long necks and paddle-like limbs. Pliosaurs, shorter-necked and more muscular, hunted larger prey. The ichthyosaurs, resembling dolphins in body but reptiles in ancestry, were still common. Ammonites spiraled in endless shells, drifting through currents alongside fish and the first true sharks. And on land, the flora was changing. In addition to the familiar ferns, conifers, and cycads, the first flowering plants, the angiosperms, began to emerge. Tiny at first, tucked between larger plants, their blooms were subtle. But their arrival would reshape ecosystems forever. Flowers meant fruit. Fruit meant seeds with greater chances of dispersal. And those seeds fed insects, birds, mammals. It was an explosion of potential. The insects responded, 2 bees began to appear. Butterflies, ants. These tiny creatures had evolved alongside plants, each shaping the other. And so the web of life grew denser. But humans, were they to visit, would still find themselves lost, overwhelmed, and likely doomed. The heat, the strange oxygen balance, the ever-present threat of predators, the lack of food or shelter, even the air, thick with spores and plant matter, would feel heavy in your lungs. The earth was not designed for us. Not yet, and yet, every moment in this age carried the seeds of what would one day become mammals, birds, flowers, forests. Every creature that lived in the Cretaceous helped shape the world to come. And as the early Cretaceous rolled on, another wave of change prepared to rise. New dinosaurs, some with crests, some with sails, some with armor plates and clubs, would begin to appear. The world was not slowing down, it was building toward something. Toward a final golden chapter in the Age of Dinosaurs. In the next part, we'll step into the late Cretaceous, where the most famous dinosaurs you've heard of finally take the stage and where their story, too, will reach its end. The Earth had grown old by now. It had spun around the sun for over 4 billion years. The mountains had risen and fallen. Oceans had shifted. Continents drifted like slow ghosts across a dark, molten mantle. And now, it was the late Cretaceous. The twilight of the Mesozoic era, beginning around 100 million years ago and ending with one final breath, 66 million years before your time. But in this twilight, life didn't fade. It flourished. The continents had moved further apart. North America, South America, Africa, Eurasia, and the newly separating India were now distinct land masses. Vast inland seas cut across some of them. In North America, a shallow sea known as the Western Interior Seaway divided the continent from the Arctic to the Gulf of Mexico, turning what would one day be Montana and Kansas into shallow, warm, brackish waters teeming with life along the seashores. Dense forests rose. Ferns still blanketed the ground. But now, flowering plants, angiosperms, were everywhere. They spread rapidly, feeding insects, birds, and small mammals. Trees with broad leaves created shaded canopies. Fruits and seeds added new links to the food chain. The world was becoming richer, more interconnected, and in this lush, diverse world, dinosaurs reached their peak, in the forests of what would become Western North America. A massive herbivore lumbered slowly through underbrush. It was Triceratops, easily recognized by its 3 horns and large frill. Its beak was sharp, able to shear through tough vegetation. It lived in herds, moved cautiously, and stood as a formidable presence, even in a world of giants. Nearby, a predator stalked, perhaps the most famous of them all, Tyrannosaurus rex, a creature so iconic, so embedded in our imaginations, that we often forget it was once real. It stood over 12 feet tall at the hip, stretching nearly 40 feet from snout to tail. It weighed between 8 and 14 tons. Its skull alone was the size of a small car. Its teeth, thick, serrated, and banana-sized, could crush bone with over 12,000 pounds of bite force. Yet for all its power, T-Rex was likely not always chasing prey. It may have been an opportunistic hunter, or even a scavenger at times. It had excellent vision, an acute sense of smell, and powerful hind legs for bursts of speed. Despite its tiny arms, its overall anatomy was a triumph of evolutionary efficiency. But T-Rex was not alone. The late Cretaceous hosted a parade of strange, specialized dinosaurs. Some walked on 2 legs, like Trudon, a small, intelligent theropod with large eyes, adapted for night vision. Others waddled on 4 like Ankylosos, whose back was covered in thick armored plates and whose tail ended in a club of solid bone. It was a living tank, nearly impervious to most predators. There was Pachycephalosaurus, with its domed skull over 10 inches thick, possibly used for headbutting in mating disputes. And there were the hadrosaurs, or duck-billed dinosaurs, like Edmontosaurus and Parasaurolophus, the latter known for its long, curved cranial crest. It may have been able to vocalize using it, producing deep, resonant calls that echoed across the plains. Feathers were now widespread among smaller Velociraptor, a name made famous by fiction, was in reality no larger than a turkey, but covered in feathers and equipped with sharp claws and a curved sickle-shaped talon on each foot. It likely hunted in packs or stalked alone through desert and scrub, more bird than beast in many ways. In South America, Giganotosaurus reigned larger than T-Rex, though more lightly built. In Africa, Spinosaurus, a dinosaur unlike any other, stalked river deltas, with a long crocodilian snout, conical teeth, and a massive sail-like structure on its back. It may have been semi-aquatic, feeding on fish and scavenging from the water's edge. Birds, true birds, were now common. Some nested in colonies, others flew in flocks. They laid eggs, guarded nests, and sang in the dawn. Their wings had improved, their tails had shortened, their beaks were adapting to sea and in. The line between dinosaur and bird was blurred, perhaps meaningless by now. Mammals, though still small, had diversified too. They dug burrows, lived in trees, swam in lakes. Some glided like flying squirrels, some had pouches, some ate insects, others gnawed on plants. They stayed out of the dinosaurs' way, living mostly at night. They would get their chance, but not yet in the seas. Life was no less dramatic. Mosasaurus, a massive marine reptile, patrolled the oceans. Up to 50 feet long, it was the apex predator of its time, eating fish, ammonites, turtles, and even other marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs were now in decline, replaced by plesiosaurs and large fish. Giant sea turtles glided through the waves. Sharks were becoming more modern in appearance. Coral reefs buzzed with activity. In the skies, pterosaurs were nearing the end of their reign. Some, like Quetzalcoatlus, were the largest flying animals of all time, with wingspans up to 36 feet. They took off with a vault, using powerful forelimbs, and soared on thermal currents, covering vast distances with minimal effort. But all was not calm. Beneath this vibrant surface, subtle signs stirred. Volcanic activity increased. Atmospheric CO fluctuated. Sea levels rose and fell. Ecosystems began to show stress. Entire regions turned to floodplains or dried into deserts. The planet was shifting gears again. And then, somewhere in what we now call the Yucatan Peninsula, a rock from space, a 10-kilometer-wide asteroid, hurtled toward Earth. It traveled faster than a bullet, faster than sound, faster than thought, and when it struck, it unleashed an energy greater than all the nuclear weapons ever built. But that story is still to come. For now, in these final million years, the Earth was still a living, breathing cathedral of biodiversity. The dinosaurs, unaware of what waited above the atmosphere, went about their lives, seeding, nesting, migrating. They had ruled the Earth for over 150 million years, long enough that they had no reason to expect anything would ever change. But everything changes. In the next part, we'll witness the end of the dinosaurs, the cataclysm that reshaped life forever, and the strange, silent aftermath that followed. The Earth turned, as it always had. Sunlight warmed forests and plains. Wind moved through tall conifers. In the distance, a herd of triceratops stirred, snorting in the early morning mist. A flock of small birds took to the air, their calls drifting softly across a riverbank. All was as it had been. All seemed eternal. But above the clouds, invisible and silent, something ancient approached. The asteroid had been traveling for millions of years, a silent passenger of the solar system. It was around 10 to 12 kilometers, wide, about the size of a city, but its speed gave it power. It struck Earth with unimaginable force, targeting what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in modern-day Mexico. The impact occurred in a region already rich with limestone and sulfur deposits, amplifying the devastation. The moment of collision lasted only seconds, but the consequences would echo for eons. The energy released was greater than 1 billion Hiroshima bombs. The asteroid punched a deep crater into the Earth over 180 kilometers wide and nearly 20 kilometers deep. In an instant, rock vaporized. The air turned to fire. A blinding flash spread in every direction, followed by shock waves that circled the globe. Trees were flattened, entire forests ignited. Every creature within hundreds of kilometers died instantly, never knowing what had happened. But this was only the beginning. Debris was hurled high into the atmosphere: molten rock, ash, sulfur compounds, microscopic glass spheres. Some of it escaped Earth's gravity. The rest fell back down, re-entering the atmosphere at such speeds that it superheated the air, creating a global broil. Fires spread across continents. Dust and soot filled the skies. In the following days, the Earth grew dark. Sunlight, blocked by a thick shroud of dust, could no longer reach the surface. Photosynthesis slowed, then stopped. Plants withered. Temperatures fell. The world entered a kind of nuclear winter. It grew cold, then colder still. Ocean temperatures dropped. Rain turned acidic. Food chains collapsed, starting with the smallest creatures and working their way upward. The great herbivores, deprived of food, weakened. Triceratops, Edmontosaurus, Ankylosaurus. They fell silently across plains and forests. Predators, from Tyrannosaurus rex to Dromaeosaurus, followed soon after, unable to find prey. The strong died, and the weak died faster. The skies, once filled with soaring pterosaurs, became still. 75% of all species on Earth went extinct in a geological instant. The marine world suffered equally. Phytoplankton, those tiny floating plants that supported entire oceanic ecosystems, died off without sunlight. With them went the zooplankton, then the small fish, then the larger ones. Mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ammonites, all gone. Coral reefs collapsed. The oceans entered a silence that would last for ages. Yet not all life was extinguished. Some creatures survived not by strength or size, but by luck, adaptability, and circumstance. Burrowing animals, like certain small mammals and reptiles, were protected from the worst of the heat and cold. Scavengers could feed on the abundant dead. Crocodilians, turtles, frogs, and a few species of fish endured in isolated pockets. And birds. Not all, but some. Especially those that were small, ground-dwelling, and generalist in their diets. From them, the lineage of modern birds would rise. The Earth, after the impact, entered a period of stillness. The dust hung in the air for months, perhaps even years. Trees died, rivers slowed. The air was cooler, thinner. Volcanoes continued to erupt in what is now India, spewing lava across vast plains in the Deccan Traps, releasing gases that may have further altered the climate. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dust began to settle. Sunlight returned. Mosses grew first, then ferns, then flowering plants, reborn from roots or seeds buried deep in soil. Insects reappeared, then frogs, small birds, and mammals, creatures who had waited in the shadows for over 150 million years. Their time had come, and the age of dinosaurs had ended. Yet the dinosaurs themselves were not entirely gone. Every pigeon, every eagle, every hummingbird in your modern sky carries the spark of those ancient creatures. Their bones may be lighter, their teeth may be gone, but their hearts beat with the same rhythm. They sing, they nest, they raise young just as they did in a forgotten world. From the ashes of extinction, a new era began. The Cenozoic era, the Age of Mammals. But that is another story. For now, the Earth lies quiet. The last Tyrannosaurus has fallen, the forests are scorched, the seas emptied. The planet mourns and recovers, as it always has. Life, in its endless patience, begins again. After fire and shadow, silence reigned. The world that once thundered with the footsteps of titanic creatures now whispered through ashes. Across vast landscapes that had been vibrant with life, there was stillness. Charred trunks reached upward, like skeletal fingers. Rivers, once crowded with life, flowed quietly, carrying soot and memories. The forests were gone. The skies were quiet. Even the ocean, which had echoed with the cries of marine reptiles, had become subdued. This was the Earth just after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, around 66 million years ago. It was a wounded planet, but not a dead one. Dust still. hung in the upper atmosphere, dimming the sunlight. For years, temperatures remained low, nights long, and growth slow. But life, as it always does, began again, not with noise, but with patience. The first signs of recovery came from the plant stop ferns, were the first to return. Hardy and fast-growing, they colonized the barren soil in a matter of seasons. Botanists today refer to the fern spike in the fossil record, an abundance of fern spores marking the first wave of post-extinction flora. They were followed by other pioneers, mosses, liverworts, and small flowering plants, their seeds having waded underground through the chaos. Insects returned, feeding on the new vegetation. Tiny beetles, ants, and flies crawled and buzzed, rebuilding ancient networks. Spiders wove webs between ferns, waiting patiently for movement. Termites and other detritivores began the long work of turning death back into soil. Then came the vertebrates. The dinosaurs were gone, but not entirely. Some small theropods, covered in feathers and able to adapt, had survived. From them came the birds. They nested on the ground, foraged in forests, and slowly diversified again. Their songs would take time to return, but their presence was constant flashes of movement between trees, or silhouettes gliding across quiet skies. Mammals, once kept small and nocturnal during the reign of dinosaurs, now had space to grow. The first were modest, shrew-like creatures with sharp teeth and keen senses. They scurried through underbrush, climbed trees, and dug burrows. Some ate insects, others tried fruits. A few took to the water. They evolved quickly. Within a few million years, a blink in geological time, the mammals began to diversify into forms that would define the next era. Some grew larger, some adapted for grazing, others for hunting. Early primates emerged, tree-dwelling, grasping, alert. Rodents evolved, then bats, then hoofed animals, then carnivores. The oceans also stirred with recovery. Though ammonites and mosasaurs had vanished, marine life began to fill the gaps. Fish populations rebounded. Small marine reptiles, like sea turtles, continued to thrive. Coral reefs started to rebuild. Sharks, survivors of many past extinctions, took advantage of the vacancies and diversified into new forms. Mollusks returned. So did plankton, the base of the oceanic food web. The Earth had changed, but it had not ended. It had transformed. The continents continued to drift. India, moving northward, was on a collision course with Asia. South America was still isolated, fostering unique ecosystems. Africa was drifting toward the Mediterranean. Australia and Antarctica were slowly parting ways, a split that would define southern climates for millions of years. As the Paleocene epoch unfolded, the first chapter of the new Cenozoic era, world began to feel warmer again. Forests returned, lush and thick. Rain fell in abundance. Rivers swelled. New lakes formed. Volcanoes, though less destructive than before, enriched the soil with minerals. The sky slowly brightened. Sunlight poured once again across hills and plains, and as Earth healed, it began to forget. It forgot the thunder of Tyrannosaurus. It forgot the flash of Velociraptor's claw, the long necks of Brachiosaurus, the bony armor of the sea-bound form of Mosasaurus. These were now memories etched only into stone. Fossils began to form, skeletons buried in sediment, locked in time, waiting patiently beneath feet that would never know their names. For tens of millions of years, no human eyes would witness these bones, and yet, the descendants of the fallen still lived. In the cry of a hawk, in the silence of a nesting seabird, in the heartbeat of a mouse, or the shuffle of a small mammal under leaves, life continued, adapted, resilient, always moving forward. It would be millions more years before something walked upright, before someone looked at the stars and asked questions. But for now, Earth was content to rebuild in peace. The dinosaurs were gone, but the story was far from over. The world had entered a new chapter. After the mass extinction at the end of the Cretaceous, the Earth began to reshape itself, not just physically, but biologically. The absence of dinosaurs left room in the ecological stage. The often overlooked and deeply adaptable began to stretch into new roles. The age of mammals had begun, but it did not announce itself with fanfare. It whispered into being, one quiet footstep at a time. The Paleocene epoch, spanning from about 66 to 56 million years ago, was a time of renewal. Most of the dominant life forms were unfamiliar to modern eyes. The mammals that roamed the forests and plains were not yet elephants or tigers or deer. Instead, they were primitive, generalized forms, small, with simple teeth and basic diets. Many resembled rodents or tree shrews. Some looked vaguely like raccoons or possums, with grasping fingers and twitching noses. These early mammals were mostly nocturnal. They relied on smell more than sight. They were cautious and quick. Their bones, when found in the fossil record, are often fragmented and delicate, but their adaptability was their greatest strength. In the void left by the extinction, they began to evolve in every direction. The forests returned as well. What had once been dominated by cotses, conifers, and ginkgos during the Age of Dinosaurs now gave way to flowering plants. Grasses had not yet spread widely, but fruit-bearing trees became more common. Vines twisted up toward the canopy. The forest floor was dim and humid. Ferns still grew in abundance, and fungi flourished on fallen logs. Insects returned in force: ants, beetles, butterflies, and bees. With them came pollination, and with pollination, coevolution between plants and animals became increasingly important. Birds diversified, too. The ancient lineage that had survived the extinction began to branch out. Some birds developed stronger beaks perfect for cracking seeds. Others became swift insect hunters. Some learned to dive for fish, while others clung to tree trunks and listened for grubs. By the end of the Paleocene, birds were found in nearly every niche, filling roles that dinosaurs had once occupied in very different forms. In the oceans, new dynasties rose. With mosasaurs and marine reptiles gone, mammals began to take their place. Early ancestors of whales, such as Prehistoric, began to explore life near the water's edge. Though they still walked on land, their feet were beginning to change. Their ears became better at hearing underwater. These creatures would one day become the fully aquatic whales and dolphins we know today. But for now, they still walked clumsily on muddy shores, sniffing the wind and dipping cautiously into shallow seas. Sharks continued to dominate, as they had for hundreds of millions of years. They cruised the ocean silently, their bodies largely unchanged. Rays and skates flapped across the seafloor. Bony fish darted through kelp forests and coral reefs that had begun to reassemble themselves. But high above all this change, the Earth itself was moving. Continental drift continued, slowly rearranging the face of the planet. India was moving rapidly northward and would soon collide with Asia, creating the Himalayan mountain range. South America remained an isolated island continent, its fauna evolving in splendid isolation. Australia too had begun to separate from Antarctica, drifting northward into warmer waters. These changes in geography would eventually shape entire ecosystems. In North America, mammals such as Plesiosaurus, an early relative of primates, scurried through the trees. It had long fingers and a long tail, and likely spent much of its time climbing. It fed on fruits and seeds, and may have had good vision for seeing in the dim forest light. Though it was not a monkey, and certainly not a human ancestor in any direct way, it was part of the unfolding story of primate of Louisiana, story that would continue quietly for tens of millions of years before anyone noticed. During this time, the Earth's climate was warm, much warmer than today. There were no polar ice caps. Sea levels were higher. Tropical forests stretched across much of the globe, even reaching into areas that are now temperate or cold. It was a greenhouse world, rich with carbon dioxide, and life was thriving in the warmth. And yet, in the fossil record, we find few signs of aggression or fear. The Paleocene world, while dynamic, was not one of giants or drama. It was a place of rebuilding, of quiet competition, and slow experimentation. Evolution was exploring new forms with careful patience. Many of these early mammals were short. In evolutionary terms, their lineages came and went quickly, replaced by more specialized descendants. But each species left its mark: subtle changes in teeth, bones, or behavior that paved the way for the next. The Earth was conducting millions of silent experiments all at once. and above it all, time flowed on. The sounds of the Paleocene were different from those of the Cretaceous. There was no more thunder of enormous footsteps. Instead, there was the chatter of insects, the rustle of small feet in the underbrush, and the occasional call of a primitive bird. Rivers flowed as they always had. Storms rolled across the land. Sunlight filtered through dense leaves. The planet continued its slow turn, indifferent and eternal. It would not be until the next epoch, that Eocene, that many of the mammals we now recognize would appear. Horses, elephants, whales, bats, and monkeys. But the Paleocene had made their arrival possible. It had cleared the stage, reset the clock, and in doing so it had opened the door to an entirely new world. The world was warm. In fact, it had rarely been warmer. The Eocene epoch, beginning about 56 million years ago, was the second chapter of the Cenozoic era, time when the Earth was cloaked in thick forests. Seas teemed with new creatures, and the descendants of survivors from the last great extinction were quietly thriving. If the Paleocene had been a careful rehearsal, the Eocene was a confident step onto the main stage. The Earth's temperature rose sharply at the beginning of this epoch. This event is known as the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PET. For a brief geological moment about 200,000 years, carbon flooded into the atmosphere. The causes are still debated: volcanic activity, methane release from seafloor sediments, or shifting ocean currents. But the result was clear. The climate grew even hotter. Polar regions, now covered in ice, were instead home to forests. Alligators lived in what is now the Arctic. There were no ice caps, no permafrost, only warmth. And in this greenhouse world, life flourished. Forests grew thick and tall. Tropical and subtropical vegetation spread across almost every continent. Dense canopies shaded underbrush where countless insects buzzed and hummed. Vines wrapped around tree trunks. Bright fruits ripened in the dappled light. The air was humid, rich with scent. From above, the Earth would have appeared green and lush, a planet of forests and winding rivers. In this landscape, mammals came into their own. The animals of the Eocene were more advanced than those of the Paleocene. Evolution had moved quickly. Mammals had begun to specialize, taking on new forms that would seem more familiar to us. Early horses trotted through the forest undergrowth, but they were small. Eohippus, the dawn horse, was about the size of a modern-day fox, with several toes on each foot and teeth suited for browsing leaves. Elsewhere, tiny primates like Nitharctus and Adapus clambered through trees. They had forward-facing eyes, giving them better depth perception, a useful trait for judging distances between branches. Their hands could grip. Their brains were larger. These animals were not yet monkeys or apes, but they were on the path. In the quiet, leafy world of the Eocene forest, they thrived. The oceans were alive with innovation as well. Whales true. Whales had begun to evolve from land-dwelling ancestors. One such animal was Ambulocetus, sometimes called the walking whale. It had limbs for swimming but could still waddle awkwardly on land. Over time, these semi-aquatic mammals would give rise to fully aquatic species, including a long serpentine predator of the Eocene seas, with small hind limbs, vestiges of a land-based past. Basilosaurus was one of the most striking examples of how evolution reuses old tools in new ways. Meanwhile, early bats took to the skies. Fossils from this time reveal creatures that could already fly with skill and precision. They used echolocation to navigate in darkness, an ability, as strange as it is effective. Bats had found a niche largely untouched by other mammals, and they quickly diversified. Their wings whispered through the warm night air, searching for insects among the leaves. Carnivorous mammals also began to emerge in new forms. One group, known as the creodonts, roamed the Eocene forests and plains. They were not true cats or dogs but filled similar roles. Some were small and stealthy. Others, like Hyanodon, were much larger and had powerful jaws. They were efficient hunters, taking down prey with strategy rather than sheer size. But as time passed, other predator lineages more familiar to us today would rise and outcompete them. Even the land itself was changing. India continued its journey north. colliding with Asia and beginning the long process of uplifting the Himalayas. Mountains formed slowly, but the collision altered global weather patterns and reshaped regional climates. South America remained isolated, home to its own evolving mammalian fauna, strange-hoofed animals, armored herbivores, and fearsome flightless birds. Australia too was drifting further from Antarctica, and its forests became home to early marsupials, pouched mammals that would eventually give rise to kangaroos, koalas, and wombats. Isolation shaped the life found there, and would continue to do so for millions of years. Birds grew in size and variety. One of the most remarkable was Gistornis, a giant flightless bird standing over 2 meters tall, with a massive beak and powerful legs. It once puzzled paleontologists. Was it a herbivore or predator? The answer is still debated, but its presence reminds us that in the wake of dinosaur extinction, birds sometimes reclaimed a portion of their ancestors' grandeur. Despite the warmth of the epoch, change was coming. Toward the end of the Eocene, the climate began to cool again. Slowly, the great warmth began to fade. Ocean currents shifted. Carbon was drawn down into deep ocean basins. Glaciers, for the first time in millions of years, began to form again in Antarctica. Forests retreated. In some regions, replaced by open woodlands or grasslands. The cozy greenhouse world of the Eocene was beginning to end, but its legacy was profound. The Eocene was a time of rapid evolution, of experimentation and expansion. It set the foundation for so much of what would come next. Horses, whales, primates, elephants, bats all had their roots in this time. In the canopy and the underbrush, in the rivers and shallow seas, life had found ways to stretch, grow, and imagine new forms. Time moved forward, as it always did, hurried, steady, and silent. Roughly 34 million years ago, the world shifted once more. The warm, forest-rich earth of the Eocene began to cool. This was the beginning of the Oligocene epoch, a quieter, leaner, more open chapter in Earth's story. The air became crisper. Forests retreated slightly from the poles, replaced by grasslands and open woodlands. The world did not lose its life, it rearranged it. Got climate change, driven by shifting continents and altered ocean currents, was central to this transformation. The separation of Antarctica from South America and Australia allowed the Antarctic circumpolar current to form. Cold water began to circulate around the southern pole, insulating it and initiating the formation of permanent ice sheets. The poles, once forested and mild, began to freeze. Sea levels dropped, temperatures cooled, seasons became more pronounced, and animals, as always, adapted. The dense forests of the Eocene gave way in many areas to mosaics of open land and sparse trees. Grasses, still relatively new in Earth's history, began to spread further. In doing so, they laid the foundation for what would become one of the planet's most influential ecosystems, the grassland. In these new spaces, mammals changed early. Forms of elephants, such as Paleomastodon, wandered through the savannas. They were smaller than modern elephants, with short tusks and broad feet. Their trunks were less developed, but useful. They grazed on soft vegetation and browsed trees, shaping the landscape as they moved. Horses, too, evolved rapidly during this time. Species like Mesohippus still had 3 toes, but they were faster, more adapted for life on open ground. Their teeth began to change, becoming better suited for chewing tough grasses. Running became more important than hiding. Speed replaced camouflage. Carnivores responded in kind. Members of the canid family, early ancestors of modern dogs, emerged. They hunted in packs, used their noses to track prey, and gradually replaced earlier predator lineages, like the Cretaceous. Meanwhile, nimravids, sometimes called full sabertohis, roamed the forests and plains, stalking prey with long fangs and stealthy steps. Though not true cats, they filled similar ecological roles. Primates also continued to evolve, though more slowly. In Africa and parts of Asia, monkeys began to differentiate from earlier prosimians. Their eyes faced forward. Their limbs were agile. Their social behaviors grew more complex. By the end of the Oligocene, the first apes would begin to emerge, bigger, more intelligent, and more capable of manipulating their environment. South America remained a world apart, still separated from North America. It developed its own unique ecosystems. Strange mammals, like Astropitherium with its trunk-like snout, and Toxodon with its heavy body and large teeth, wandered the continent. Giant flightless birds, like Pherocericos, sometimes called terror birds, became top predators. They were swift, with hooked beaks and strong legs. They ruled the grasslands in the absence of large mammalian carnivores. Australia, too, drifted further from the rest of the world. Its marsupial inhabitants, diversified kangaroo ancestors, hopped through the underbrush. Wombat-like creatures dug burrows. Giant flightless birds evolved here as well, though different from their South American cousins. Isolation preserved Australia's distinct identity, which it holds to this day. In the oceans, toothed whales and baleen whales diverged from common ancestors. Toothed whales like Squalodon hunted fish using echolocation, while baleen whales gradually developed filter-feeding mechanisms, allowing them to consume vast amounts of plankton and krill. Their ancestors had walked on land just tens of millions of years before, but now, they were fully aquatic, sleek, and graceful. Sharks continued to rule the seas, largely unchanged. Rays glided along the ocean floor. Coral reefs flourished in warm, shallow waters. Sea turtles basked on tropical beaches. Life underwater was stable, diverse, and abundant. The landscape of the Oligocene felt transitional. It was a world leaving behind the lush forests of earlier epochs and moving toward the wide open spaces of the Miocene and beyond. It was a world of new opportunities and new challenges. Predator-prey dynamics sharpened. Limbs grew longer. Senses became more refined. The arms race of evolution never paused, it merely changed pace. Even the skies changed. Songbirds, which may have originated in Australia during the Eocene, began to spread. Their songs filled the forests and grasslands, complex and beautiful. Owls hunted by night. Hawks soared on midday thermals. Birds of all sizes took advantage of the new environments, nesting in cliffs, trees, or grass. And above all this, the earth spun on. The stars still moved through their ancient dance. The moon slowly drifted further away. The continents crept across the globe, measured not in miles per hour, but in centimeters per year. And the Oligocene, quiet and steady, marched slowly toward its close. There were no humans to see it, no eyes to watch the migration of herds or the bloom of flowers after a long dry season, no voices to name the animals or map the rivers. But, still, it all happened, carefully, patiently, and with a kind of purpose that needed no audience. The world was changing, and in that change, the roots of the future were quietly taking hold. Time had smoothed the edges of the continents. By the beginning of the Miocene epoch, roughly 23 million years ago, the Earth was a place of wind and wide spaces. The warmth of the Eocene was long gone, and the deep forests of old had pulled back, making room for open plains and expansive grasslands. The world felt more spacious, more dynamic, and in many ways, more familiar. Grasses now dominated much of the terrestrial surface. These humble plants, once only a minor presence, had transformed the landscape. Their spread changed the rules of survival. Animals could no longer rely only on browsing leaves or hiding in thick undergrowth. They had to move fast and far in these open spaces. Herbivores adapted. Horses, which had evolved from forest-dwelling, multi-toed browsers, now grew larger, leaner, and faster. Species like Merychippus had a single dominant toe. The precursor to the modern hoofant could gallop swiftly over hard ground. Their teeth developed high crowns and complex ridges, perfect for grinding tough, abrasive grasses. This was no longer the domain of quiet leaf eaters. It was the age of grazers. Other animals joined them. Early antelopes, camels, deer, and rhinoceroses moved in great numbers across the plains. They formed herds for safety, migrating with the seasons in search of water and food. Massive gomphithers, relatives of elephants, with 4 tusks, roamed through Africa and Eurasia, using their trunks to pluck foliage and their bulk to discourage predators. And where herbivores went, predators followed. The canids' dog relatives flourished in this new world. They evolved keen senses of smell and endurance for long chases. Cats, too, became more specialized. Amphibian, known as the bear dog, was both powerful and agile. It hunted by ambush and strength, a transitional predator between older and modern forms. But among the most fascinating were the true saber-toothed cats. Genera like Mechaerodus emerged during the Miocene, their upper canine teeth growing long, sharp, and deadly. These cats didn't bite and hold like modern lions. They slashed, targeting the necks of their prey in sudden, calculated attacks. All of this took place on an Earth that was slowly taking its modern form. Continents continued to shift. Africa moved ever closer to Eurasia, and when they collided, they created the Mediterranean Sea and began forming the Alps. India pressed further into Asia, lifting the Himalayas even higher. As these mountains grew, they affected global climate, changing rainfall patterns and creating rain shadows that turned some areas arid. To the west, North and South America were still separated, but the Caribbean plate was in motion. Volcanoes bubbled up in what is now Central America, slowly building the land bridge that would later allow creatures to migrate between the continents in an event called the Great American Biotic Interchange, though that would not happen until much later. In the oceans, life was no less dynamic. Whales had become giants. Baleen whales, such as early Cetatherium, grew to impressive sizes, filtering vast amounts of krill and plankton through long plates of keratin. Toothed whales, including ancient relatives of today's dolphins and orcas, honed their hunting abilities and developed complex social behaviors. Their songs and clicks echoed through the deep. Sharks continued to evolve. The megalodon, Otodus megalodon, may have appeared in the Miocene. It was one of the largest predators the oceans had ever seen, perhaps over 50 feet long with jaws that could crush bone and teeth the size of a human hand. Though its reign would end millions of years later, during the Miocene, it was one of the apex predators of its age. The Miocene climate was generally cooler and drier than earlier epochs, but still warmer than today. Seasons became more distinct, rainfall patterns more erratic. The result was a world in flux. Habitats changed regularly, and adaptability became a virtue. In the trees that still bordered grasslands and rivers, primates were evolving too. The earliest great apes, the ancestors of gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans, began to appear in Africa and Eurasia. Proconsul, an ape-like primate, had traits suited for climbing and grasping. These animals lived in family groups, used social grooming, and likely had basic forms of communication. They were clever, observant, and adaptable traits that would serve their descendants well. Elsewhere in Asia, relatives of gibbons and orangutans developed. They moved through the canopy with grace, using long arms to swing from branch to branch. These apes did not yet think as we do, but their brains were growing, their senses sharpening, their societies forming. The seeds of intelligence had been planted. The flora of the Miocene reflected the change in climate. Grasses became dominant in more regions. Trees adapted to drier conditions. Deciduous forests expanded in some areas, while deserts began to form in others. Plants with deep roots and wind-pollinated flowers began to spread. It was a plant world shaped by movement and survival. Even the insects responded. Bees, already millions of years old, diversified to match the spread of flowering plants. Ants formed complex colonies. Butterflies fluttered across meadows. These creatures, so small and quiet, were essential parts of the web of life, pollinating plants, breaking down waste, and feeding other animals. And through it all, Earth spun. On the Miocene was a time of transition. The planet was no longer dominated by forests, nor yet fully committed to deserts or tundras. It was a middle ground, a place of motion, of migration, of expansion. It set the stage for what would follow: the appearance of hominins, the drying of continents, and the eventual rise of human ancestors. But that was still far in the future, for now, the Earth belonged to the animals, the hoofed and the clawed, the winged and the finned, the clever and the silent. It belonged to the winds that swept over grassy plains, the rains that fell on mountain slopes, and the stars that watched it all from above.
The slow and quiet work of time continued, reshaping the Earth in subtle ways that only mattered over eons. By the Pliocene epoch, beginning around 5.3 million years ago, the Earth had grown cooler and drier. It was no longer the lush greenhouse world of earlier ages. Ice began to gather at the poles, and the once mighty tropical forests had largely withdrawn to equatorial regions. Open land, wind-swept plains, and scattered woodlands spread across much of the globe. A new world was forming, a world of contrast, challenge, and change. The continents had taken shapes we would recognize today. North and South America were now connected by the rising land bridge of Central America, forming the Isthmus of Panama. This event changed more than maps, it redirected ocean currents. Warm Pacific waters were cut off from the Atlantic, and the Gulf Stream began to circulate, bringing warmer waters toward Europe and increasing rainfall in some regions. The seas cooled. The Arctic Ocean began to develop more seasonal ice cover. Antarctica, now fully encircled by cold currents, became a frozen landmass. These changes had deep consequences for life everywhere. As the planet cooled, grasslands expanded further, and with them came new adaptations in animals. Grazing mammals thrived. In Africa, herds of antelope, zebras, and giraffes filled the savannas. Elephants, no longer just gomphotheres or mastodons, evolved into more modern forms, such as Loxodonta, the African elephant. These enormous creatures moved in matriarchal groups, communicating through low rumbles that could travel through the ground for miles. Horses spread across Eurasia and North America. They were sleek, swift, and specialized for distance running. Camels, bison, and deer also expanded their ranges. Many mammals became larger and more robust, shaped by the need to survive through longer dry seasons and fluctuating climates. Predators evolved alongside their prey. Saber-toothed cats, like Smilodon, became iconic symbols of the age. With their powerful forelimbs and dagger-like teeth, they ambushed large mammals, taking them down in quick bursts of violence. Meanwhile, early hyenas, wild dogs, and big cats, like Panthera species, hunted cooperatively or scavenged leftovers. Marine life continued to evolve as well. Whales diversified into many species, some growing enormous, while others became more specialized in their diets. Dolphins and porpoises became widespread and intelligent. The megalodon, still present in the early Pliocene, ruled the seas until it vanished, perhaps unable to adapt to changing temperatures and declining prey. Birds took to the skies in greater numbers. In the open plains, ostrich-like flightless, birds ran swiftly across the ground. In the trees, smaller species evolved bright feathers and complex songs. Birds of prey, such as early eagles and hawks, soared above looking for rodents, snakes, and other small animals. And deep in Africa, something new stirred in the underbrush. Among the many species of primates evolving in scattered woodlands and forests, a small group began to change in profound ways. They stood upright, not all the time, not perfectly, but more than any primates before them. Their hands became more dexterous. Their brains, slowly but surely, began to grow. Not yet human, but they were something close. These were the first hominins. One of the earliest known was Australopithecus afarensis, who lived in eastern Africa about 3 to 4 million years ago. She and many like her walked on 2 legs, used simple tools, and likely communicated with primitive vocalizations and gestures. Her world was filled with predators, droughts, and competition, but she adapted. She learned. She survived. She is best known to us as Lucy, named after the Beatles song that played during her discovery. Lucy lived in a world of shifting rivers, dry grasslands, and scattered forests. She and her kind may have slept in trees for safety and roamed the ground by day, foraging for roots, fruits, and small animals. Their lives were not easy, but their upright posture gave them new advantages: freed hands, better views of the horizon, and the ability to travel longer distances more efficiently. This evolutionary path would not stop as the Pliocene progressed. More hominin species appeared: Australopithecus africanus, Paranthropus, and eventually the earliest members of the genus Homo. These beings crafted more sophisticated tools, hunted in groups, and began to shape their environments in subtle ways. Elsewhere, Asia and Europe saw waves of migrations. Mammoths moved across the tundra, adapted to cold with thick fur and massive size. Woolly rhinoceroses, giant deer, and other Ice Age megafauna developed to withstand increasingly harsh winters. Seasonal snow became more common. Glaciers advanced and retreated in cycles. South America, now connected to the north, experienced a biological invasion. North American mammals, such as saber-toothed cats, bears, horses, and deer, moved south. In return, armadillos, ground sloths, and opossums migrated north. Some species thrived in their new lands. Others vanished under the pressure of new competition. And through all of this, the Earth continued its quiet rhythm. Seasons changed. Mountains rose. Rivers carved valleys. The moon drifted slowly farther away. The magnetic poles wobbled. The sky, bright with stars, remained a canopy of light and mystery. And now, for the first time in Earth's long, ancient history, a creature walked its surface with the potential to wonder, to imagine, and to look back upon all the ages that had come before. But the story was not yet complete. The Pliocene was merely a prelude. The great Ice Ages loomed ahead, and humanity was still just a whisper in the wind. The Earth breathed cold. The Pleistocene epoch, beginning about 2.6 million years ago, brought the planet into an age unlike any it had seen before. Glaciers vast, crushing rivers of ice crept slowly across continents. They carved valleys, leveled forests, and ground mountains into dust. In cycles that lasted tens of thousands of years, these glaciers advanced and retreated, reshaping land and life over and over again. The Earth was locked in a rhythmic dance of glacial periods and interglacial warming. During the coldest times, ice sheets covered much of North America, Europe, and Asia. In the warmth between, the land would green again. Rivers flowed freely, animals migrated, and life stretched across the landscape until the next great freeze came. This was the Ice Age, and its world was vast and wild. The animals of the Pleistocene were colossal. In the north, woolly mammoths wandered the frozen plains. With long, spiraling tusks and thick fur, they moved in herds across grasslands dusted with snow. Mastodons, slightly smaller but equally powerful, foraged in woodlands. Both were proboscideans, relatives of elephants, and both would eventually vanish. The woolly rhinoceros, heavy and shaggy, plodded through the Eurasian steppes, using its great horn to sweep snow aside. Towering over them all, the giant ground sloth of South America lumbered through forests on two legs, tearing branches from trees. It was slow, immense, and almost unchallenged except by predators, and the predators were many. The saber-toothed. Cats, like Smilodon, hunted in packs, coordinating to take down the largest of prey. Their massive upper canines, curved like ivory knives, were designed to slash throats and pierce arteries. Dire wolves, larger and stronger than modern wolves, moved in groups and may have worked together to chase and exhaust their quarry. In the air, giant birds soared. Some, like Argentavis, though mostly from earlier epochs, represented the last of the great flying creatures, with wingspans as wide as small airplanes. On the ground, massive terror birds like Furuzurcos had only recently gone extinct in South America. But even in the Ice Age, birds of prey, scavengers, and songbirds filled the skies. In the cold seas, life teemed. Whales, now fully modern in form, sang beneath the waves. Seals, walruses, and sea lions thrived along the ice-lined coasts. Polar bears, a relatively new species, stalked the frozen shores, perfectly adapted to this glacial environment. And then there were the humans. For millions of years, our ancestors had evolved quietly, from Australopithecus to Homo habilis, from Homo erectus to Homo heidelbergensis. They had walked, hunted, and learned. They had shaped stones into tools, discovered fire, and built shelters. They had crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and spread far beyond the forests of Africa. By the middle of the Pleistocene, Homo neanderthalensis lived across Europe and Western Asia, stocky and strong, with large brains and robust bones. Neanderthals were skilled hunters, tool makers, and survivors. They buried their dead, tended to their injured, and likely spoke in complex vocalizations. Their lives were harsh, but they endured through cold, scarcity, and danger. And around 300,000 years ago, in Africa, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerged. They were leaner, more adaptable, and perhaps more socially complex than any hominin before them. They painted in caves, fashioned ornaments from shells, and crafted tools with precision. Over time, they spread across the continents, moving in waves that filled the world. They met Neanderthals in Europe. They encountered Denisovans in Asia. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they interbred. Remnants of those ancient genes still live in us today. These early humans were wanderers and storytellers. They watched the skies and followed the stars. They noticed patterns in seasons, animal migrations, and the growth of plants. They hunted mammoths, lit fires in caves, and passed down knowledge through language and memory. As the Ice Age reached its later stages, Homo sapiens crossed into new frontiers. They moved into the Americas, likely via the Bering Land Bridge, a corridor of land that once connected Siberia to Alaska. They spread across the vast continents, adapting to deserts, forests, and plains. In the blink of geologic time, humanity had become a force, but nature was not finished. Around 12,000 years ago, the climate began to shift. Temperatures rose, ice sheets melted, the sea levels climbed, flooding land bridges and separating continents. Forests grew where once there had been tundra. Glaciers shrank into mountain valleys. The great Ice Age megafauna could not adapt quickly. Enough. One by one, they disappeared. Mammoths, mastodons, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, and more. Some scientists believe humans played a role in their extinction through hunting or habitat disruption. Others point to the rapid warming and changing ecosystems. Likely, it was both. And so the Pleistocene ended, giving way to the Holocene. The epoch we live in now, the Ice Age, was over. Humanity remained. From the long shadow of extinction, a new species rose, not the strongest, not the fastest, but the one most capable of adaptation, memory, and imagination. We built cities, we formed civilizations. We charted the stars and split the atom. We remembered the past and dreamed of the future. And yet, it is easy to forget that we are recent. For over 99.9% of Earth's history, we did not exist. The Earth spun through darkness and light, storm and calm, extinction and rebirth, all without us. The age of the dinosaurs, the reign of the reptiles, the forests of the Carboniferous, the shallow seas of the Cambrian, they all came and went while we were not even a whisper in the void. You would not last a day in the age of dinosaurs, would not survive the heat of the Cretaceous sun, the fangs of a raptor, the tremble of a sauropod's steps. You would not find comfort in the Triassic's alien air, nor refuge in the Jurassic's ferns and floods. Even the Ice Age would freeze your breath and test your will. But now, you know what came before. You've walked through time. From the dawn of life to the rise of mammals, from the silent oceans to the icy plains, You have witnessed the deep history of Earth, one soft chapter at a time. Now, perhaps, it is time to close your eyes. The world is quiet again. The stars have not moved. Sleep? Well, traveler in time,